evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm Elliot Margolis. I'm here with my co-host Gail Burke, and our guest today is Dan Fishman, who is running for state representative in the city of Beverly. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, glad to have you. My first question would be, why are you running? Because you're running against someone that's going to be very difficult to beat.
I think that when we look at what's happened at the presidential level in politics, we see how incredibly divided we are in this country right now. And I feel like the reason that we are so divided is not because we, the people, are divided, but because the parties are splitting us. And I really object to what the Democratic Party has been doing in Massachusetts at this point in time. It's really been one-party rule. A great example of that is last time in the legislature, the Republicans posed a piece of legislation, actually an amendment to the rules, that said all the legislators have to read the bills before they vote on them. You would think, that's common sense. Everybody should vote for that. But the Democrats ruled that out of order. They actually blocked the bill. And the reason why is not because they're actually opposed to it, but because the Speaker didn't want it, because he wants to be able to push things through very quickly. He has an agenda. But that's a case where party politics is really working against us. So for me, running as an independent, I think that I can make a difference because I can propose a piece of legislation that the Democrats won't instinctively oppose because a Republican opposed it. The other thing is that 52% of the Massachusetts electorate is independent. 0% of the state house is independent. It's all Republicans and Democrats. So if you're an unenrolled voter in Massachusetts, who is actually representing you right now in the state house?
Well, speaking of bills, when you talk about bills, there are a number of bills on the docket right now, as well as ballot questions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions is legalizing marijuana. Now, you made a comment that it would generate a lot of money that could be put into the schools.
Mm-hmm.
However, considering what is happening with the opioid problem, do you still feel the same way?
Absolutely. And in fact, legalizing marijuana addresses the opioid program as well. Washington and Colorado, where they legalized marijuana, opiate deaths dropped dramatically, 85%. If you want to stop people from dying from opiates in Massachusetts, legalize marijuana right away. The #1 drug killer in the world, in the United States especially, is prescription drugs. People get addicted to opiates that are being prescribed. Then, when their prescription runs out, their insurance runs out, whatever it is, they're hooked. And they end up buying heroin on the street because that cuts their pain. And that is what kills them. If they could buy legal marijuana much cheaper, which is a wonderful painkiller as well, that's going to save lives.
Here's the problem that I see. Okay, we're being taxed to death in Massachusetts, as we are in the entire country. And the more money we give the State House, the more money they spend. They are totally and completely irresponsible with our money.
I agree.
Why should we give them more? So, my proposal would be, if you want to have legalized marijuana, what are you going to cut out so that we don't have to pay more and more in taxes?
I think there's a tremendous number of things that we could cut out. I think that if we were going to go line by line through the budget and things are cut out, I can point to any number of things. One of the things that I think right now, the way the auditor is spending money is atrocious considering the number of audits that are happening at the state level. We're supposed to audit every state agency once every 3 years. Since Suzanne Bump has been in charge, that number has fallen way behind. There's money that's being spent on overtime right now. We saw what happened with the T because there's no oversight being done on state-sponsored jobs, patronage jobs. That's money that we could eliminate. Marijuana will generate an enormous amount of money. In Colorado last year, every single school district was funded at 125%. Okay, that never happens.
But they're finding in Colorado that particularly the kind of marijuana that's being sold is much stronger than used to be available. And my concern is, and a lot of people are now getting on board with the fact that marijuana can be a gateway drug to stronger drugs. And that's why I think that medical marijuana I don't have a problem with, but just legalizing marijuana across the board I think would be a big mistake.
Alcohol is a gateway drug. You're not going to find anybody who gets addicted to heroin who didn't start with alcohol. And the problem is, or probably with cigarettes as well, the question is, how far do you want to go to limit the liberty of somebody who's engaged in a behavior where they're not actually hurting somebody else. Now, I'll give you a high number. This number is not actually true, but let's say that 10% of the people who smoke marijuana go on to smoke heroin. The number is actually much, much lower, but even if it were 10%, are you willing to limit 90% of the people who are able to responsibly smoke marijuana so that you can protect those 10 people? Is the state supposed to be a nanny to us all to stop us from doing all these things that could get us in trouble?
What about, now, we know that alcohol impairs your driving, okay? And we also know that our legal system allows people to be caught with alcohol, drunk driving dozens of times without any penalty at all.
Right.
And the reason for that, obviously, is the state legislators like to drink and drive themselves, so they don't want to put themselves in jail. What about marijuana? Is there going to be any kind of penalty for having been high on marijuana, driving and killing somebody?
Well, as you probably know, it used to be called drunk driving, but now it's called operating under the influence.
Right.
And so if you are under the influence of a drug that impairs your driving, you should absolutely be arrested and you should go to jail. And I don't care if that's a prescription drug. Even, you know, we had this great example with, I don't remember which Kennedy it was from Rhode Island, but just got busted. Patrick Kennedy, who got busted while driving under medication, and they let him go. For me, if you're operating under the influence, you should absolutely be cited. And if you do it enough, you should lose your license and you should go to jail. And I'll include in that operating under the influence of a cell phone. If you are texting while you're driving, you are still distracted. Any form of distracted driving, for me, it's all the same.
How do you feel about hands-free driving with a cell phone as opposed to people talking on the phone?
I think hands-free is entirely, that's fine. I do that myself. I have a mount that I put my cell phone on.
I guess my point is, should there be a law in Massachusetts? There is one in Connecticut, there is one in New York, there is one in New Jersey, but in Massachusetts you can hold the phone to your ear.
So I don't support that legislation. I actually wrote a piece in the Globe, came out about 6 months ago. And the reason why is because I think it cheapens the idea of a general distracted driving rule. If an officer sees you swerving, if he sees you out of control, then pull the person over, give them a ticket. That's distracted driving no matter what. However, would we say that we don't think people should be able to drink coffee while they were driving?
Well,
Massachusetts would grind to a halt if we did that.
Then you get into a lot of different areas. I want to change the subject a little bit. We talked a few minutes ago, before we went on camera, about Common Core, and I know that you're not in favor of it.
Yep.
Are you in favor of charter schools?
I am in favor of charter schools. I believe that competition brings out the best in us. I think that also charter schools have a specific advantage in that they can hold teachers more accountable than public schools can because of the fact that they have different rules in terms of how they deal with the union.
Do you think that the cap should be lifted?
I do. Absolutely.
Well, most charter schools don't have a union.
Yep, exactly right. And now, I'm not an anti-union person. I believe that people have the right to assemble, but I don't believe that you should have to belong to a union to get a job. I don't agree with collective bargaining in terms of saying that I can't actually go in and negotiate a raise for myself just because I'm a member of the union. And that's one of the problems right now. More than that, the unions, with the way the pension plan is in place right now in Massachusetts, are actually hurting education because when a teacher comes in and starts teaching, 20 years until they are fully vested in their pension. If 10 years in, they find out that they hate teaching, they're probably going to stick it out for the next 10 years so they can get that full pension. And that hurts the kids because now they get a teacher who doesn't really like teaching. It hurts the school district because they can't hire a younger teacher who would want to come in. And it hurts the teacher themselves who are stuck in a job they don't want. If we replaced the teacher's pension plan, dollar for dollar with a 401k, doesn't hurt the teachers at all. They don't lose any money at all. But it gives them the ability to say, you know what? Maybe teaching isn't for me. They got a little more portability. They can go to a different career. It gives us a greater rotation. We bring in more young teachers who are enthusiastic, more recently out of school, more familiar with what's going on. It allows us to keep the long-term teachers, generous retirement plan because 401k, they're going to be in good shape in terms of that.
Does that mean you're opposed to tenure?
There is a place for tenure in the university system specifically, and there's a place for having some people who feel like they have the right to speak their minds all the time. I believe that dissent and discourse is what makes us work better, and having spirited conversations. If tenure is what makes people have the freedom to speak their minds, I'm not opposed to it. However, I would be very, very hesitant about the number of people that I would give tenure to. And I would really give it to the people who I think, you know what, this person, by being here, benefits us enormously. It certainly would not be a blank check that after you've served 20 years, we're going to give you tenure.
It's not 20 years. I mean, you can get tenure as a teacher after about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's a terrible mistake.
About Common Core, one of the problems I see with Common Core, among many, we really don't know what the cost of Common Core is, and nobody seems to know. What do we do to get the transparency of how much Common Core and PARCC testing is really costing the state of Massachusetts?
One of the reasons we don't know is because they're still making it up as they go along.
I know.
And as a computer professional, right now I write software that deals in special education. Common Core would actually be hugely lucrative for me. For the company I work for the type of software that I write, I can make an enormous amount of money writing Common Core stuff. But as a former teacher, I don't want to see that happen because I think Common Core does exactly what it says. It drags us all down to a common level. The idea that there's going to be a standard of education that is right for Massachusetts and right for Mississippi, that is a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. If Massachusetts were its own country, we would be the 6th best country in the world in education. And the reason why is because we have an excellence here in our teachers, in our principals, in our superintendents, in our school districts, and actually even in the parent-teacher organizations. Having gone to PTO meetings in Massachusetts, our parents are more involved than other places where I work. And so right now, I work in education in a lot of different states, and we do it so much better here. I don't want to see that jeopardized.
Now, isn't it a shame if Massachusetts is #1 in this country and only 6th in the world? That's a real shame.
Well, you have to think about it in terms of scale, right? So there's how many people? 7 million people living in Massachusetts right now. Singapore is about 1 million people. Okay, and they have the ability. I mean, in terms of density of education, stuff like that, we have a wide variety of people. But when you talk about some of the small city states, or you talk about a country like Sweden, a very homogeneous population, right? They don't have to worry about teaching in other languages so much, anything like that. They have the ability, because they have one centralized culture, that they're probably more efficient in terms of some of the ways we spend money. And we're not number 6 because we're terrible. We're number 6 in terms of, it's the equivalent of maybe winning a bronze medal in the Olympics. There's nothing to be embarrassed about there.
No, but there's always room for improvement.
And we don't stop here.
And Common Core is certainly not the way to improve it.
Absolutely. No, Common Core in many respects stops you from trying to institute local improvement. One of the things that's great about us in Massachusetts is that we challenge our school districts to say, okay, these are the standards that we are setting for ourselves. When you have Common Core and we are going to exceed those standards by so much, we lose that challenge that currently makes our school systems great.
Hey, let's go to some other subjects for a minute. Now, I mentioned this to your opponent last time he was in. We've got projects on 95 and 128 that have been going on now for somewhere around 10, 15 years with no end in sight. Mm-hmm. What can you do? I mean, he said they're working on fixing the problem. You can work on it until doomsday. It's not happening. All they're doing is creating more beginning projects, and the traffic is not very nice in the morning.
No, it's been really bad. And I think specifically anybody who's gone south on 128 off of 22, where I got out of, knows that last year there was a giant pothole in the right-hand lane, and all the local people knew about it, and we actually would get out of the lane, and so there was a traffic jam because everybody's merging over to the left to avoid this sinkhole. And it took about 4 months for it to get fixed. Accountability is something that has to be immediate and apparent. And so when there are complaints about the roads, we need a system that keeps track of that sort of thing, and it should be publicly visible. So when Beverly residents complain, and in this day and age of a computer information system, there's no reason for that stuff to vanish into the dark. When we start complaining about a road system, there should be a system that says, okay, somebody first started complaining about this in December, then 12 people complained about it in January, 100 people complained about it in February, and we're still not getting any action on it. And that should be on the state's website, as far as I'm concerned. Department of Transportation should be accountable for every complaint about the highway. Finding a way to put that online, Louis Brandeis said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. You know, when we shine some light on the programs, I think things will get better. The one other thing I think we should do, they do this in New York already, road projects, when they can, should be done at night. There might be a small premium that we pay for that, but I think it's worth it in terms of the inconvenience to the people who are having to drive through them. If we can find a way to get a little bit more done, even though in general I want to conserve the money that we spend. If we had to spend 10% more on road projects and have them done at night and not impact people in the day, I think that would be a benefit to a lot of people.
All right. Are you familiar with the Real ID Act
I am.
of 2005?
I am. I know that
It calls
we
for
will not-
a federal database of all American citizens and forces them to carry a government-approved ID containing what they consider biometric features. In other words, gun ownership, health records, purchasing habits, religious beliefs, and all of it will be available for whoever. Are you in favor of keeping it or having it go forward or getting rid of it?
I'm against a national ID. I think that the Fourth Amendment guarantees our right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, and that specifically means that the government does not have a database about you, including everything about you. Where this affects people in Massachusetts specifically is that, I believe it's next year, you will not be able to use your driver's license to get on a plane flying out of Logan.
Right.
You will have to have a passport because Massachusetts, the driver's license does not correspond to the Real ID standard. Now, there's a reason why we don't correspond to the Real ID standard, and that's because we issue driver's license to illegal immigrants. I think that that is a mistake as well. So
Absolutely.
it's one of those things where we're balanced out, and two wrongs don't make a right, but two rights can make an airplane. I think that we need to change the fact that we give driver's license to undocumented people. We should
So
only
you're
give driver's.
opposed to giving them a license?
I am opposed to giving them license. We should stop giving driver's license to undocumented workers. The thing is that if we do that, our driver's license will then be approved for the Real ID program. And so then we can use it for ID for driving around. That's the one thing that's stopping us right now. I think there's 46 states that driver's license have been approved for Real ID.
Well, I find it interesting that the Democrats are in favor of this, and yet when you talk about voter ID, they don't want to hear about it.
Exactly.
It's
And-
discriminatory.
Well, and voter ID is a great example of one of those things where I think if we worked a little bit harder, we can probably come up with a plan that everybody agrees on. Because if you talk to Democrats about voter ID plans, they don't want voter fraud to happen. And they will grudgingly admit that it has happened, especially here in Massachusetts. It's particularly easy.
I have
right?
never heard a Democrat admit that it does happen.
You push them around a little bit, you get some of the evidence where it's happened, but you're right. But we know that it has indeed happened. But here's something that I think we could all agree upon. At this point in time, everybody has access to a cell phone. When you register to vote, you get a voter ID, set up a thing where you text your picture in with your phone number, with your voter registration number. So when the state prints out those lists of all the voters who are going to come up and they check you off, they have a photo right there next to it. And if you can't get access to a cell phone, you can't get a photo taken, we'll set up a photo booth in the voting place. So for that one time you come in, we'll take your picture there, and then we'll have your picture for the rest of the time. That cannot be considered inconvenient, in my opinion. I think we're saying, you know what? People don't have to get to the DMV. They can register. They just have to have somebody with a cell phone show up, and then we'll have a voter ID system in place. It's one of those things where I think if we work harder, those people who favor the idea of a photo identification to vote, we can meet their standard and say it's not going to be inconvenient, but still have a photograph and get the system that we think protects voting integrity.
Well, how about leaving it up to the individual? Why does the state have to provide resources for them to have their picture taken? If you're going to vote, you should have some skin in the game. You should have to do something on your own without the state providing it for you.
The problem with where you get into that is you're talking about potentially a means test, right? And that was something that was used in a discriminatory fashion in the South. The idea that you would say, well, you know what? If you want to vote, you should be willing to pay $5 to vote, right? That's not a lot of money.
No,
Show me that you're
no,
interested.
that's not the same at all, because you need to have ID if you go to cash a check. You need to have some kind of ID for lots of things that you can access.
I think that you'll find that there are a lot of elderly people who have expired driver's licenses and people who take care of them who don't really need an ID that much in their lives anymore. even if it's 10 people, and we can provide a system that's relatively straightforward, say, you get somebody with a cell phone to come in and text your photo in, that takes care of most of the situations. And we should work harder in voter registration. We should work harder to make sure that we're not being discriminatory in who gets to vote. And going that extra step is what's going to make it so that we can have the system that we want, where there actually is a photograph required to vote. But if what it takes for that to happen is that we have to work a little bit harder, we have to say, you know what, if you absolutely cannot find somebody to take your picture and text it in, then we will provide a system in the state, then we provide something at the poll. If that's what it takes to secure the election, I'm willing to go that far.
Are you in favor of having an ID so that in order to get an EBT card, for
Yes.
instance? And
Doesn't the EBT card print with a picture on it?
I don't know. I don't have one.
Okay, I don't have one either.
I work
but
for a living.
All right, I do believe that it actually prints with a photograph on it so that other people can't use it.
Well, are you willing, when talking about EBT cards, sorry,
That's all right.
I just thought of
It's
something
like
when
my
you said
second
that.
wife,
That's fine.
you know?
I thought of something when you said that. The rules on EBT cards are ridiculous. For instance, there are certain things you can and cannot do with EBT cards.
Right.
However, you can't buy liquor with an EBT card. However, you can go to an ATM, get the cash, and then go to the liquor store. How ridiculous is that?
I agree. I think the EBT card should only be good for purchase in approved EBT locations.
I've even seen them in the grocery store. They buy things that they can't get under the EBT card, and there was the manager came over, told them to go to the ATM, come back, and you can use the cash to buy whatever it is you want.
So
Ridiculous.
one of my personal issues, so long before I became involved in politics, I was worried about hunger in the United States. I've been a big supporter of Feeding America, even before when it was called Second Harvest. When I ran for Congress, Beverly Bootstraps brought me in, showed me the open market that they do for the homeless, where they bring in fresh vegetables. Fresh vegetables is one of the things that if you are on food stamps, on other things, you are unlikely to be eating a lot of fresh vegetables because it's easier to buy something that's stored, things that are perishable, things that spoil. It's not worth it. And I understand that those places have not traditionally taken EBT cards. If you go to a farmer's market or if you see something like that. But there's no excuse for that now, okay? Anybody with an iPhone can accept a credit card payment, can accept an EBT payment. So I think that I would say that EBT cards should only be used for purchasing food. Vendors who are selling fresh produce should go to the extra step, it won't be a lot, to be able to process an EBT card on their phone, and we'll be good to go. The risk of people taking out cash and using it for other things is too much. That's not what the program is meant to be. It's meant to help people sustain themselves in a hard time.
Okay, so you and I are paying for these people's EBT cards. So the question now is, should we allow people, or should we say to people, to get your EBT card, you must be drug tested first?
No.
Why?
So first of all, it doesn't work, right? When they did it in Florida, they spent over $1 million on drug testing, and they found 2 people who did it. So it's completely a huge waste of money. Secondly, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, okay? Unreasonable search and seizure. You're going to test them for drugs. You don't know what the situation is in which somebody, what if they have a legal prescription for medical marijuana? Or what if there's, if you eat poppy seeds, if you eat a poppy bagel, you're going to test positive for heroin because heroin is made from poppies. Okay, there's a lot of things that go on in terms of drug testing.
Is that why I'm happy when I have a poppy seed bagel? I'm just wondering.
I never knew that.
It could be. Well, you think about it. They talk about the poppy plant, and that's what heroin comes from all the time.
Yeah.
There are other things you can eat that will potentially screw a drug test one way or the other so that, it gives a wrong reading. Finding a way, if we're concerned about people doing drugs, we need to think about that as a medical issue. You look what's happening right now in Gloucester, where the police captain set up this wonderful program where people can come in and turn in their drugs, and the only consequence is that they're going to get help to deal with their addiction. Addiction is a medical problem. It's not a criminal one. 50% of the people in the jail right now in the United States are in jail for nonviolent drug crimes. These people could be paying taxes. They could be holding down jobs. They were holding down jobs beforehand. They were making enough money to be able to buy the drugs. Instead, we've moved these people out of our society and we're maintaining this giant prison state. We have more people in prison in the United States than China does. We should never be ahead of China in anything that involves people.
Well, China is so strict on how they treat people to begin with. No one's, I mean, they're afraid to break the law.
You're right there, but they arrest people for almost anything. India would be another example. Okay, we have more people in jail in the United States than China and India combined.
Yeah, but in some of those countries that you're talking about, you commit a crime and you get your hand cut off.
Well, that's like Saudi Arabia and places like that.
Places like India do the same thing. So
We are locking away people who can be good citizens because they have been engaged in nonviolent drug crimes.
But how
Possession
many
of marijuana.
times, because a lot of times they get caught with drugs and they go to court and they're dismissed. And they may commit a crime. And time after time after time, the same thing happens. So when do you draw the line and say, that's it? You know, you may be addicted to drugs, you're committing crimes, they may be so-called non-violent right now. However, who knows?
You're right, who knows? And that's a great question. So for me, the core of, I ran as a libertarian in 2012. The core of the Libertarian Party's principles is what we call the non-aggression principle. We do not believe that it is okay to commit an act of aggression against another person. You can defend yourself all you want, but you cannot initially engage in aggression. Anybody who engages in aggression should be punished. So if somebody is stealing to support their drug habit, they should go to jail for that. If somebody gets into a fight because they're stoned or high or whatever, they should go to the jail for that. But somebody sitting on a park by themselves, smoking a joint, or even worse, they're just sitting there and they happen to have marijuana in them, those people should not go to jail. They shouldn't be taken away from their children.
This is a fascinating conversation, but our time is almost up,
Okay.
Jan. So would you like to give a few parting words to your constituents?
Sure.
To be?
Sure.
Just wrap it up and then we'll
Sounds
move
great.
on.
So the fundamental reason why I'm running, more than anything else, is I believe that politicians are actively doing things to divide us at this point in time. I think that 80% of us agree on about 80% of the issues. And for me, in that extra 20% of the things where we don't agree, government should make no laws. We have to recognize that you and I, we are all actually individual minorities of one. Okay, there's something about me that's different than you. There's something about Elliot that's different than you, Gail. Recognizing that combined as minorities, we are different than the majority means we should recognize the fact that a majority of 51 people should not be a way to impose a law on a minority of 41% or 49%. Look what happened with the CPA here in Beverly. Okay, the CPA actually only affects property owners, right? I own a house in Beverly. I'm assuming you guys own property in Beverly as well. Every property owner voted against the CPA, but it passed because the people who voted against it overwhelmed us, overwhelmed all the people who don't have it. That is a tyranny of the majority. Okay? That is what democracy is not supposed to be.
Okay,
Finding a way to prevent
we're going to
that.
have to end it there.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
And
Thank you.
good luck.
Thank you.
And we hope that you'll come back and visit us.
I would be happy to do so.
And I want to thank the audience for watching, and we will see you next time.